In this chemistry course, you will have 4 labs that you submit into Edgenuity, and then I actually grade those. Right, so it won't be Edgenuity grading them; it'll be me grading those. The purpose of this video then is to show you how to go about doing those labs and to just give you some tips that I think will make it a lot easier for you than you just trying to do it, kind of stumble through it yourself. First of all, there are going to be the 4 labs that you're going to be doing will be physical and chemical changes that I'll be grading. Physical and chemical changes lab. There will be the Charles Law lab, calorimetry and specific heat lab, and then the enthalpy lab. Those 4 labs. They'll be very similar in the way that you'll do them, to be turned in. So first of all, I'm going to take you to the physical and chemical changes lab. So we're in the physical chemical changes lab. In the instruction for each lab, you will find somewhere in the instruction a link to the student guide. Okay, so the student guide, if you click that link, I've already opened it. It'll open up this here, which is the physical and chemical changes student guide. I'm just going to show you the physical and chemical changes one, and then you can, it'll be pretty much the same for the rest of them. So just a couple things in the lab guide itself or the student guide itself. They'll give you a question and hypothesis, and I'm covering these things in particular on purpose, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. They'll have some safety there, and then in the procedure, they'll have both the materials and the procedure listed out for you, and then they will have a data table, okay? The data table, my suggestion to you is that before going into, so I'll jump back over here real quick, before going into the virtual lab itself, so this portion here, sorry, I got away from it there when I go back there. Before going into the virtual lab, I would make sure you have that student guide downloaded. And I would put it into a form using like Kami if you wanted to, or just however you know how to edit a PDF, right? I'd have a PDF of it ready to be edited, and then I would have this ready because as you go through the virtual part of the lab, this data table, you can just fill it in as you're doing it, right? Because as you do the lab. Now, keep in mind that all labs for this course are virtual. You don't have to do any labs, like you don't have to get any materials or anything like that. But as you go through the virtual lab, you'll just fill this in as you go through it. I would suggest doing that, okay? Now, the big thing to keep in mind is that a lot of students will give me up to here, and then they think they're finished. There is one more part that you need, which is the analysis and the conclusion. So make sure that you include analysis and conclusion. So why did I walk you through this? Because here's the next thing that you'll find. When you go to turn in the lab each time in the assignment part of it, they'll have this lab report guide. The lab report guide is the same for all 4 labs. When you click on that, it gives you the directions, and the most important thing is this lab report checklist. Now, you'll notice that the introduction, if you look through this and look at what it's asking you, like, did you state the question? Did you restate the hypothesis? And then the materials and procedure and data collection. If you give me this, all right, it already has all those things: question and hypothesis, the procedure, the materials. It has the data table, right? And it has everything as long as you fill that data table in. Everything up to here, you've already done. And it is okay for you to give me a copy of that student guide, all right? And I will accept that as being good for all of this here, okay? So, and I'm not going to consider it plagiarism because I know where you got it from. You know where you got it from. It's not like you're trying to pass this off as if like you actually made this student guide. I know you didn't make the student guide, right? What I'm going to look at more than will be important is the analysis and the conclusion, okay? So do make sure you give me that though, because that will be part of your grade for this stuff, right? But then the analysis and conclusion, here's the stuff that we need to talk about. So the first one says, did you interpret your data and graphs in the analysis rather than just restate your findings? In other words, what we're looking for here is any relationships that you see. Tell me what they are. Don't just restate, well, this is what happened. Tell me what relationships do you see. I'll give you a hint for the physical and chemical changes one, right? So for the physical and chemical changes one, the big question is that how do you know whether a physical or chemical change happened, right? So I would have you put there, I noticed that every time a physical change happened, this is what we saw, right? I noticed that every time we saw a chemical change happen, this is what we saw. So you're showing a relationship between what we saw and physical change, what we saw and chemical change, right? Did you determine whether your data supported or refuted your hypothesis? This is pretty easy to do. What is the best way to do this is just restate the hypothesis and then tell me whether or not your data supported it, right? So you would literally just take the hypothesis that they've already given you, and you would just say the hypothesis that, and whatever they gave you, is supported by the data, or you can say it is not supported by the data, right? And that's how you would do the hypothesis. Did you describe possible sources of error? Possible sources of error would be something that could have happened during the lab that would have thrown off your data, or just thrown off your conclusion, right? What you concluded from the lab. This is sometimes students have trouble with this because you're doing it as a virtual lab. So you're like, well, there really wasn't much that could have gone wrong during the virtual lab that would have thrown off, the lab itself, or thrown off what data I collected. So one way to do this is, if you want to, you can just say, well, if we were to do this in a school lab, in a chemistry lab in school, here are some things that could have thrown things off, right? That could have made it so that I didn't get the right thing. It could be something like, you didn't measure properly. You used the wrong materials. There were some external environment things going on that threw off what was going on in the lab, those kinds of things. And the last one then, did you suggest ways to improve or further the lab investigation? Probably the easiest one. You're gonna feel like, oh, he's helping us cheat. I'm not helping you cheat, but this is probably the easiest one to do. Is that one way to improve it is, you'll notice that every time they do these, they usually, I think if every one of the lab, if I'm not mistaken, they do one trial for each one, right? That's really not a good way to do something in a lab, except for just sometimes that's one of the limitations. But one way to always improve that would be to do multiple trials, just to make sure that you didn't have something weird going on the first time you did it. And then there's just other, anything else that you can find that would help to improve it. Okay. So that's good right there. As long as you just recap really quick, as long as you just make sure that you give me this student guide for each one of the labs, and then you filled in the data part of it, and then you include an analysis and conclusion on top of that, then you should be good. And make sure you include these things that we talked about in the analysis and conclusion. All right, hope that helps. If you have any questions, always email me, and I can help you out with that.